members of the public. The meeting has really one agenda item, and it's to talk about the guideline we received from the authority's budget office, specifically entitled Restrictions on Grants and Loans Made by Public Authorities. It's caused lots of consternation within the community, and I just want everybody to understand exactly what it is, what's new about it, what we're trying to do about it, and what we hopefully have a discussion about what actions we can take in the future to abide by the ruling and make sure the public doesn't get harmed in any way when we do it. So I'm going to start by asking Dawn to take us through the resolution itself, or the guidance itself, and tell us a little bit about the ABO so we get some background.
All right, so I think most people have seen the guidance because it appeared in the Wire and it was on the blog and it's made a lot of circulation. If anyone needs a copy,
Yeah, some copies here too.
and they feel free to pass around. One of the questions Margie asked me was a little background on the new policy guideline, if we have it. And the fact of the matter is we do not have much background. We were sitting at the computer one day and the email came in and we got the guidance, and it was the biggest surprise to us as it was to anyone else. And just for general background, what the ABO is, ABO stands for the Authority's Budget Office, was created through the Public Authorities Accountability Act and the Public Authorities Reform Act. Purpose of the ABO is to promote transparency and accountability of public authorities and their practices within New York State, and to make sure that public authorities are acting in the public interest consistent with their purpose. The ABO is an independent office that by law receives assistance and support from the Department of State for the effective and efficient execution of its powers and duties. There are a number of powers and duties that are enumerated, which I can walk through quickly. There's 7 points we have here, and they are: 1, overseeing the operations and finances of public authorities; 2, collecting, analyzing, disseminating organizational, operational, performance, and financial information on public authorities to make that information available to the public; 3, promulgating regulations to carry out the purposes for which the ABO is created; 4, evaluating the compliance of public authorities with their mission statements and laws of New York State, as well as advising and guiding public authorities concerning their compliance. For enforcement, they can give public warning, censure authorities for non-compliance, and recommend the dismissal of officers and directors. 6, investigating and acting on complaints concerning the failure of a public authority to comply with state law. 7, issuing reports of its activities, findings, analysis, and recommendations. I think that's fairly, looks germane. It lets us know what their overall purpose is, and I think a couple of people have also asked, what can happen to us if we do not follow the guidance. As it says here, one thing is they can censor authorities for non-compliance and recommend dismissal of officers and directors. Now to the specific guidance. I think Margie asked, bottom line, what does the mandate require us to do? And essentially the guidance is, it's clear what it says there. It directs public authorities like RIOC to immediately cease all fundings of grants to public.
Excuse me, could you just do this part a little bit slower?
Okay, certainly.
Thanks.
The guidance is, if you read the guidance, it's fairly clear. And in summary, it directs public authorities like RIOC to immediately cease all funding and grants to public and private interests in the absence of express authority to do so in the authority's enabling legislation. So that's essentially what it's saying. So in order to continue funding, we have to look to the enabling legislation and see if, we are authorized to do so. And in terms of, Margie's asked the impact on the Roosevelt Island, what would be the impact? Now this situation it's a very fluid situation. We just got the guidance. Other authorities and agencies got the same guidance, and our understanding is that many of them also are struggling with what to do and what this means for their programs going forward. Obviously, it's particularly sensitive to a place like RIOC and Roosevelt Island because of the long-standing Public Purpose Fund program, the youth center as well, and we are currently, we're in discussions with the governor's office, and we are also taking a close look at all of these programs to see what we can do in order to help, everything survive and continue on here. And
Could you, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but if you get into this, tell me you're getting to it.
Go on.
Could you specifically read the part that says that it's not enough for it to just say,
Sure.
let's do these?
Sure, I'll read you two key parts, and this is quoting from the guidance. This is a quote, "This limitation applies to the power of state or local authority to award its monies in the form of grants and loans to public or private interests. Such financial assistance is prohibited unless expressly authorized in statute." The second section I'm going to read, that I believe Margie was referring to, it says, "Moreover," this is quotes as well, "moreover, statutory language such as, quote, to do all things necessary and convenient to carry out its purposes, or, quote, to act in the public interest, or, quote, to lessen the burden of the government," end quote, "should not be construed as providing a state or local authority with implied authorization to make grants or loans from its own monies in the absence of clear statutory language."
Right, so unless our statute, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, but unless our statute specifically said you may give loans to the Disabled Association, or you may give money, grants rather, to the Seniors Association, we can't do it because it says, because the statute doesn't specifically cite those particular places.
Well, that would be ideal if the language was that.
It
If
would.
it was if that explicit language, we wouldn't have an issue at all.
Right.
The restrictions they have here are a little bit broader than what's called for in our statute. For example, in our statute, in our enabling statute, it talks about, let me find the exact language. The RIOC Act talks about significant future development, including recreational and other facilities. The RIOC Act also refers back to the General Development Plan, which talks about a comprehensive system of community facilities, which includes recreational facilities. And in addition, we had submitted a mission statement to the ABO in 2011, which was approved by the ABO, which talked about parks and recreation as well. Those are a little bit more narrow than, the language that the ABO has said would not apply in our circumstances or in general circumstances.
Well, I understand the intent of the paragraph about statutory language such as to do all things necessary, next to last paragraph. I understand the intent of that, but I point out two things. First, our statutory language, Public Law 866, says we are to develop, operate, and manage. Roosevelt,
A community.
a community. Thank you. Without being specific as what developing, operating, or managing a community means. So,
But actually, even in there, it does say actually, you're correct. But it actually says when the statute contemplates significant future development on the island, including the provision of additional housing,
So
commercial,
also
civic,
there.
recreational.
the second point I wanted to make, I'm sorry, Shirley, is that next to the last paragraph is a judgment and an opinion. There's no basis in law, for them to say language such as this can't enable you to do this stuff. They're just saying, they're just throwing down an opinion here of their own. And whether it has standing in law or not, I don't know. Whether they have the authority as a state budget authority to make a statement like that is probably challengeable. Although I don't think there's much profit in challenging it, but it's just some people in a room saying, let's say this, and then saying it. That doesn't mean that it has the force of law in any way, shape, or form. Or maybe it doesn't.
I think we're really getting caught up in these ABO guidelines, and this is really off what Swiss are. The ABO guidelines looks to grants and loans. And you're quite right, Margie and David, to say that we have an obligation to run the community. But we still can do that. This is a very difficult time because we got this, we need to get through this time with certain programs. But that doesn't mean we can't RFP for programs that we want. That's perfectly legitimate. And that entails our obligation and duty under our statute. So it's not, these things can be done, many of them can be done, but they have to be done a different way as we take ownership of them as an operating corporation, rather than have it, you know, you have a group and you vet it. It's maybe it's semantics, you know, but that's how it is. And although I would love to discuss how many angels dance on the head of a pin, which we can do with this particular stuff, like we can do this forever. Right now, we have to get through a bad period. So that's why.
Well, that's absolutely right, and I guess that's the priority, but I recall not 15 or 20 minutes ago discussing with David and with Judy the fact that things started by residents and controlled by residents have a way of being incorporated into corporate or building policies, and this would be, I'm not arguing against your process,
right.
but you have to acknowledge that process means that we get to decide who we want to, or what processes or NGOs we want to have to perform what certain acts and obligations, and then we set out an RFP for it, and of course the NGO that's currently doing that job is going to bid for it, and but it's still all under our control, and the whole point, and we were discussing public purpose funding generally, the history of it earlier, was to let the people, you know, let the when we say let the residents association make the preliminary decisions, but it's coming directly from the people, and it's not us saying we want this and we want that.
I don't disagree, but I would just like to add that if you have, and you're right, it's a control that I really don't want, to tell you the truth, I never
Sure.
did want.
Yeah.
But it does have one good point, is that whatever group is doing it, if the residents are always complaining about it, there's a way of getting them out.
I don't understand.
Because if you put an RFP out, and let's say a group is not doing its job, we're gonna hear that it's not doing its job. I mean, we're gonna see that it's not doing its job, and then we RFP it, and they have a scorecard, and they weren't doing very well. I mean, you could look at it like that. There's no question that it is no longer the public purpose funds that goes through RIOC. There's no question about that.
Well, what about if, before we ever put out such an RFP, who tells us what kinds of RFPs and what the public requirements are for an NGO to do a certain job? Couldn't a RIOC committee advise us on that and come to us and ask for an RFP to fund such and such an organization?
Sure, I mean, I think anyone could come to us and ask
Well,
us
actually,
if they
but I
can do a
would-
particular RFP.
I agree, but I would tend to listen more from a recommendation from RIOC, which is a consensus of the citizens, residents of the island. You're right.
Not
Yeah, I
as
get
to
it.
who, but
Right.
as to the
Recommendations for the
service.
general type of need, what
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
services the residents want.
And the requirements.
Yes, anybody can come to us, of course, and ask us for stuff. Frank has a question.
Thank you. I've looked at the RIOC legislation, and my recollection is that part of that has to do with allowing the corporation to, as you said, operate and build this community. And part of that also involves doing all of the, as it refers to UDC and executing the business of the corporation in light of, in essence, what UDC would have been able to do. And if you take a look at what UDC is able to do in their legislation, in their enabling legislation, they are able to do a lot of the things that are presently done in the public purpose funds, but it's framed in terms of daycare and child centers and stuff like that. So it's not directly in the legislation, but referenced in
To what UDC has.
to what UDC is, and I think that's your way to do a lot of what you've been doing already, and I think that's your citation, and it says it here, and it references it over there, and I think that allows you. It doesn't allow necessarily everything. I think that we've done in the past in terms of public purpose funds, but I would say it's like 90% or 80% of it, and I think that might be a good avenue to, investigate. I'm not an attorney, but, you have the legal resources to look at that.
that, you mean in the sense of long-term, or to get through our current problem?
No, I think long-term, I think it addresses it long-term. I agree with Ms. Indelicato, that you still, framing this in terms of an RFP, I think is a good thing to get through the procurement aspects of it. So one is the procurement. I think the RFP process is good in that way, and you should make use of that. And the second is that in terms of the ABO's guidance, right now, if you follow the leads on the RIOC legislation into what UDC permits, it'll allow many things, including, for example, what do you do via the Eastwood Ground Lease and the Youth Center.
Okay, thanks. I think there's several things on that. First of all, we didn't get all the powers of UDC. We've got the ones that relate to Roosevelt Island, so it hasn't been quite as broad as you think. Bottom line here, we've got a new world, and I don't want to finish.
No, we could generally start speaking. The
And
foundation has been laid.
yes, it has. There were several, I guess, the most urgent things that we had were the Main Street Theater, which we've worked out an arrangement with, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, they're meeting tomorrow, I'm sure
Okay,
that
but
everything will be fine.
There's every reason to believe that's gonna be fine. The Garden Club, which I believe,
That's all worked out.
okay. The Youth Center,
I believe that at this point in time, after discussions with a variety of people and a lot of advice, that within our abilities, we can extend it for the rest of the year. However, that also will,
but we have a year to work on the
So,
long-term
yeah.
solution to this.
not a year, just
Nine
for the
months.
end
Not
of the
here,
year.
but to the end of the year. Okay. Don, you had a list of the other groups that specifically asked for public purpose funds this year?
Yes. Well, this year, hold on, let me find out what that is. The applicants for 2015 and 16 are the Roosevelt Island Day Nursery, the Roosevelt Island Historical Society, Life Frames, Main Street Theater and Dance Alliance, Roosevelt Island Seniors Association, Island Kids, Riva Gallery, R&R Concerts, PSIS 217 PTA, Roosevelt Island Disabled Association, Roosevelt Island Women's Health Organization, Roosevelt Island Youth Program for I Dig to Learn program.
Roosevelt Island Youth Program for I Dig to Learn, or
Yeah,
the I Dig to Learn? I Dig to Learn.
I
think
Dig
is
to
different
Learn,
from the
I
youth
guess,
program.
is getting it through the youth program. I'm not 100%
Oh, okay, that's right, because
certain.
they're
Is
not
that
501c3,
Christine?
that's right.
Christine.
That's
Yeah.
Christine.
Yeah, that's why you should get some of the.
Okay, so that says we've got a list of organizations, we have to look at what it is they're looking for the funds for and see if there's any way we can work with them to get that to them. Because we don't have a solution right now, long-term, to say, okay, we're putting everything back in place because we're exempt
Right. I mean,
from this
this
rule
is-
or anything like that.
The youth center was,
That was desperate
It
because
was
April
desperate
first is
and
when they
because
needed,
the-
and their salaries.
they
and
would
things
lose
everybody-
funds.
they would
But
lose-
you
and
said
they
that
would lose
the youth
funds.
center was specific, is supported very well by our establishing and enabling legislation. That's one of the things
Right.
listed in the GDP. And they have a grant from the city, which they operate a broad program here, subject to careful audit for the city and for us, for RIOC, that would basically dry up and die on the vine if we didn't do something as soon as we could.
Yeah, we would lose, the majority of their funding comes from the city. I believe we'd lose it if we couldn't administer it properly. And
Right, the city funding, the Beacon funding is leverages from what we provide here locally.
That's right.
But again, we
Which
think
I meant to
that's
say.
okay for this next little bit. So, what we as a board have to decide is what avenue we're gonna pursue, avenues, maybe more than one. I see that we have several options. We could just say, we're gonna ignore this law and just go on our own and do our own thing, and I think nobody wants to go down that road. unless
Do our
I'm
own
mistaken.
thing?
Just, say, we don't, nice, thanks for the guidance, but we're gonna just go
Well,
ahead
the
and
penalty,
continue
the
the way
penalty,
we
or
are.
the possible is pretty clear. And discussed in earlier context, board members would lose their seats, and I did not see that as a negative in any way, shape, or form. But so would our.
There's the
Oh darn. Well, the other possibility, which Dave, Don, correct me if I'm wrong, there's the possibility of referral to the IG and the AG, the Inspector General and the Attorney General.
But I think that
And
would
they-
be if there's any any
If they-
suspension,
any
suspicion of malfeasance or
Well,
anything
it's
like that, which
suspicion
is.
of malfeasance, but it is a very significant deterrent
Sure.
in as much as they might just investigate, and they might spin up time, and they might slow down the award process itself, even if we thought it was in
Right.
you know, we've seen this before,
Put things on hold
where-
for the community.
where an investigation starts and it needs to run its course because it needs
Because
to
of
run
ethics.
its course.
Yeah.
Right.
It's almost similar to asking for a ruling from the ABO, a ruling from the Attorney General to clarify exactly where we have permission under our statute or our language. So there would be time to create the case, time to argue the case, and time to wait for an answer. And wait, holding things in abeyance
Hold things
until we get
Well,
an
that might
answer.
give us 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, John?
Sorry?
Well, in developing the community, we have a variety of populations. So you have the youth center, which handles kids. Okay, so that one is really clear in the mandate. On that list, programs for the senior citizens and the disabled. That's I think that's pretty clear in developing community. The Riva Gallery is on the borderline. The school, the little schools, the smaller schools, that's a bit questionable because they're sort of kind of commercial enterprises, and to the extent that they could potentially be combined and saying these are for the preschool age kids, which are not eligible for either the senior center programs or the youth center programs, having some kind of program for
Well,
The
they're not quite as ad hoc
preschool.
as those other programs are, Michael.
Yeah.
The preschool charges money.
Yeah, so that's where it gets be more of a problem.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's that one. Well, you're listing the
I'm trying to figure if we're programmatically looking at
Yeah.
what time things are running on the island to create community that are more formalized programs. Do we need to structure some things better?
Have any of these organizations looked for donors?
Oh, yeah. A lot from the politicians.
Yes, and I think
But from other
the
places,
council
too.
member has, is looking at it and has a,
I can actually respond to that if
yeah, okay,
Sure,
sure.
Aaron.
So our office did get in contact with everyone who did apply for the public purpose funds, and we contacted them and let them know about our process through discretionary funding, and I believe most of them have applied for that funding. Our office is also working with the state senator and the assembly member on drafting a letter to send to the ABO regarding discretionary funds in support of them. In support of public purpose funds in support of them.
I'm glad you're taking that tack, because I was prepared to say at this meeting, I have not met our current state assembly member I voted for. So that's the extent of our relationship so far, as opposed to previous representatives of this island. I've always had a close working relationship one way or another, but to one degree or another. And I would hope that we'd be reaching out. I'm glad that
But I think you're talking Ben Kalos, the city, and you're talking the state, Rebecca Seawright.
I'm talking what I'm talking about.
All right, you said you're
I
state
just said I was
assembly.
glad that Ben is liaising with our state rep. I
We've
mean,
been
Ben's office
communicating
is
with both of
a
their
state rep.
offices.
And if he wasn't, I would have suggested, let's us do that. But I'm glad you guys are taking care of it.
Yeah, and we've been in communication also with
Okay.
Mr. Kalos, and he's been very helpful.
Good.
And Mr. Kalos
And
has
how
been-
about our state assemblywoman? What's her name?
Rebecca
Rebecca
Seawright.
Seawright.
Are we in communication with her?
So again, there's several things we can do. We could write to the ABO and say, can you give us an interpretation of this to get some more specifics, which I believe we've already.
Yeah, I think what's happening now is that as Don said, it's in a state of flux, and that state of flux, I think you should have to give it a little time to sort of, because we got what we need to go on for this particular thing, we're looking at other areas. to fund for this year, and then we have to look at priorities and see what operating issues, and see what they come out with. You know, I do not think that it is, I think it's going to be a different kind of look-see of things. And you're right, it's taken away in the manner that it is. You made very good suggestions on how we can get the residents involved again, so it's not our decisions, because obviously it's not, you know, we don't live here, and
There's another option that we may wanna consider, but you guys let me know how you feel about this, and that is actually amending the statute, working with our assembly member and our state senator to get the statute amended to give us discretionary funds,
Yeah, to allow us
To
some
allow us.
discretion.
to have some discretionary funds and allow us to do
Well,
grants
if it's
within the
explicitly in our,
purview.
if it's explicitly in our charter, then we're allowed to do it, cause then it's enumerated, then we can do it.
Well, yeah, that would take away any
That would
gray
take away
area
any
whatsoever.
gray
that
area
takes
at all.
away any
Right
gray
now,
area.
there's a bit of gray area given the language that's there, but if you had more
If we
express
got more
language,
specific,
Part of
there
the
would be none.
problem there is that, I'm gonna be the old fogey for a minute. You know, when we had finally gotten to the point where all the money we were spending came from residents, one way or another, either through the rents they paid, to ground rents or for stores, when we had to take the money to underwrite our expenses as it required from Cornell, all of a sudden, we're back on the state's donee list. And that gives them a say-so, well, they always had a say-so, there's always been a state financial officer, has always sat on our board.
right,
But we could take we could make the point, we could have made the point, that all of these monies that we wanna give away, all the monies we spend comes from the people here, and that we have a right to distribute some of it back directly to NGOs, but, excuse me, G, but, we can't really do that now. We needed to take that money from the state and then put this back under the state's thumb directly in terms of financial support.
I'm trying to remember, was the agreement when we got that funds that they would only be spent on the Cornell? Which I think is really just
Part of our general.
Okay, Judy?
As, you know, I look at these organizations, they're probably the best run organizations on the island. Forgive me, dear. July 1st, they release the budget. If you get money from a discretionary fund, you then go through a 25-page application, which you send into DYCD, the youth department for us, which then takes them 2 or 3 or 4 months to approve, which then goes to YMS, which is a payment agent, which means that only expenses that are approved from July 1st to next June 30th will be covered. So in simple words, you cannot get any money back until the beginning of next year, because by the time you accumulate your bank statements and your canceled checks and your stubs and your receipts and everything. So that means that anyone that's getting discretionary money will not see a thing for 9 months. So it sounds really great. Oh, my city councilman gave me money. It's at least a 3, 6, 9 month procedure. And, you know, so just don't, you know, and I really feel, you know, all of us, I lost my major funder who's 103 years old, and she decided she wanted not to give us money this year. I've gotten some money. I am very frustrated at this because I feel that we are being made pawns for other agencies' screw-ups, and that for $100,000 out of your $35 million budget or whatever it is, this is absolutely ridiculous. And I, honestly, as a private citizen, I would say, go to the developers, go to all of them, get them to donate to the community this year, because they all are making lots of money. David Kramer's opening his rental office in 6 weeks for 480 Main Street, Riverwalk Point, and all of these people are making damn good money, and Cornell is screwing the community by not giving us a cent. And I mean, this is ridiculous. If RIOC is stuck for a year, then I think it's time that everyone who has business on this island, the big corporations, come up and help the community. Because without the community, this is nothing. Every single organization here was started by people who live on this island and work on this island and care about the island. No one has to be in the Main Street Theater. No, we don't need a theater. We don't need a disabled association. We don't need a historical society. We don't need this. But this is what makes Roosevelt Island. And I'm pretty tired of, you know, us being thrown in with the thieves and scalawags of other state agencies, because we're being victimized by these agencies, by these people who are less than kosher. So I really think that if the board can't do it and you're stymied for a few months until we work something out, get the damn developers, get David Kramer, 100 grand to Monadnock and related is chicken feed. And get them to contribute to our community.
Doing that,
Thank
can you tell me if
Excuse
this is within, I just had a thought as you were saying that,
Thank you.
the 400,000 a year that we get from Cornell, it's,
Anything that's within our budget can't be given out.
but that was, my question was gonna be, could we ask them, when they give us funds, to give us 300,000?
No, 'cause our agreement is 400.
Okay, can we amend that agreement between us and them? Couldn't we amend it to 300,000 and allow them to give 100,000 to the community for other things?
Just to think about it.
I think that may be, and I'm not, going to, that may be circumventing too closely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cutting back, in theory, state funds, and it's just repurposing state funds. As far as.
But if they were willing to give more, something like
Right,
that,
Yes.
right.
yeah, that would be fine, but that,
Well, but
Right.
yeah,
it
no, but
might be
you,
worth
It,
The,
Yeah.
it can't go into our fund, that's
Okay.
the issue.
Once
We-
we got it,
we-
Once we got it, we can't
Yeah,
give it.
we
Under
can't be
the-
perceived as in any way strong arming the developer, the other
Absolutely.
businesses. Okay, whether it should be in their best interests to voluntarily contribute to some of these organizations during a time of crisis when we are, because obviously we've been doing this for a long time, and the board thinks it's important. And we would have still been doing it this year, without our agenda to go through the applications at the next meeting. So
Especially since it's a short term.
it was our intention to do this. If we hadn't been stopped, you still would have gotten your money. Well, we got stopped. So can these other organizations assist? I'm sure, can the public apply other forms of pressure to them to get them
maybe we
to
would
help?
go and ask them.
We can't force them to donate money to charitable organizations, but
Can
it
we
would
put
be nice if they did.
a toll booth on Main Street, $100 per cement mixer?
Okay,
Okay, okay, yeah.
is there a way of going back to the ABO and asking if, for them to amend their statement, and say, except for authorities that manage communities?
Clearly never dealt with the ABO.
Well, who is it? Well, is there a
Let's
way
just
that
say
we,
nobody-
as a
nobody
community,
There,
could do that?
Well, David Kadira is, but it doesn't, it's an independent organization
I
that does not
noticed there's no
report.
name,
Well,
there's no
Well,
name on their
if-
website.
The website actually comes in under the controller's office, but they don't really report into the controller's office, they really.
Yeah, if I may, it would be easier from a legislative standpoint. See, if they tried to amend the ABO regulations, they would have to apply evenly across all the organizations under the control of the ABO. If they made specific provisions in our contract to say that it's expressly included in our power to do certain things, then it would apply just to us, but it would be expressly allowed that we could do certain things in the development of the community. So getting the ABO to change their rule, that would apply across, because it would have to apply evenly across the whole state, would be probably more difficult than getting them to expressly grant us an authority to do something.
I'm trying to stay away from assumptions here.
I don't know.
But in
Yeah.
fact, we have gone to the ABO and said, hey, help us out here, see what this does to us, what can we work out? And we haven't gotten an
Which
answer.
reminds me,
David's-
I'm sorry, someone else want to talk?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Some of the this most recent discussion reminded me of two words in the ABO guidance, and those two words make me reflect upon perhaps some misunderstanding or lack of understanding within the community as to whose money are we referring to. The ABO guidance says its monies, so they're speaking about your money. And there are some in the community who think, and quite frankly, that was inserted in a recent resolution that we submitted, that RIOC submitted
Right.
forward, that it's not technically or literally RIOC's money, that the money we're referring to here is the community's money or the residents of the island's money. Can anyone make a statement as to
Yeah,
whether
that's
that
right.
makes sense?
It It's not, you're talking about the Manhattan Park Public Purpose Fund money.
Yes,
That was given
this
to
started with
RIOC.
Manhattan Park, and
To RIOC to spend on community types of things. That money has long been spent. And, back in 2001, was it? It was, we were looking back to see what what was left of that money. I think there was 600 and something thousand back in
Right,
2001.
641.
That's long been spent. We've been doing 175,000 a year for the youth center, plus 100,000 for public purpose funds, plus individual things up until that. So that original fund that we're talking about is gone. Wouldn't have mattered anyway, because once it goes into our budget to spend on the community, it becomes the state budget money.
so payment in lieu of taxes, which, as I understand it,
That's
pardon?
pilot,
It was not.
PILOST,
I know what it
PILOST,
stands for,
payment in
yes.
lieu of sales tax, which
To
is
pay-
different.
Oh, it
Payment in
is?
lieu of sales tax.
I'm sorry.
Not payment in lieu of taxes.
Well, let's see.
Pilot, payment in lieu of taxes is real estate,
I got you.
payment in lieu of real estate taxes, but this was in lieu of sales taxes.
Hmm.
That has long been gone, and that would not have been something to do,
Hmm.
and we're waiting for some of the backup for that resolution to see why people think that.
What about the money that came from the water tunnel? Do you know anything about that? That when the water tunnel when that area of the parkland was taken away to secure the water tunnel, we on the island received a sum of money that was supposed to be given to islanders for in alternate recreation.
I have to check this out, because I don't know exactly. My recollection
I was told by a resident
right.
who
My
supposedly knew
recollection
at the
is
time
when
that money was used.
DEP gave us money, but my recollection is when, for the tennis court, so the tennis court and something with Octagon Park, but I have to,
Yeah,
I could
Yeah,
be calling it incorrectly, but that was my recollection that was spent for
For
that.
one reason or another, going through old files, getting
Yeah.
rid of them, and I read that DEP thing, and it seems that it was, my recollection is the
It
tennis
was
court.
something down
Yeah.
around that end.
Yeah, that it
I
was,
don't
that was
remember
all
exactly
spent
what
for
it was,
capital.
but
It was spent for capital from down there.
Recreation.
recreational
Oh,
thing
yeah,
down there, the
capital
park
recreation.
down there, the tennis courts and
What was the time of this,
Lighthouse?
what was the time period of this alleged agreement?
When was the water tunnel?
The water tunnel?
Yeah, the one you're talking about, when?
Well, Manhattan Park opened in 1988.
You're talking
That
about
was
water
long before
tunnel.
that, we're talking about the water tunnel, it was
Ask
way before that.
Rosina, she was president, I think 1992, when the Octagon Park opened.
You're talking about a 23-year-old agreement, wondering where the money went.
Right, right, that's what I.
No, it was
Because
around
what I had
2000.
heard about
It
was
was around
that the water
2000, I
tunnel
remember.
money was used to run the sewer lines for Southtown,
No,
so
that's the
that
other
was the
way.
complaint.
I know
Because when
who
I
said that,
heard
why.
about it at a community board, and I learned that we were supposed to have some payment in lieu of losing that area. So I asked about it, and nobody could tell me where the money went at the time.
I mean, we can look it up, but that was my recollection, that it was something down at that area, there was DEP, there was a letter outlining the whole thing, and we went through that whole thing when we were in with the Southtown litigation. And I remember that there was something, and I also remember that we said, oh yeah, it was spent for that, I just don't remember what that was at the time. Okay, so,